sneering elites who are attempting to counter populist opinion in this country that immigration's gone too far.
Sometimes when middle-aged men want to be hip and trendy, they can sometimes miss the target.
The trend is, as you say, relentlessly doing down our own country.
I don't think the British Museum does hate Britain, but let me just put in a few disclaimers before I get completely eviscerated by you.
Now, from actual war to culture war. The British Museum appears to be at war with itself. To mark World Poetry Day, the supposed jewel in the crown of British culture has declared war on chavs, gammons, and anyone who's worried about migration. Have a look at this.
There's foreigners falling from the sky, come to scrub our toilets and rob us blind. And since we're in no mood to share, they'll come and take what's rightfully theirs. On orange boats, in lorry vans, invasion is their master plan. Their funny words, their spicy food, breeding in their multitudes. The time is now, the hour is near, for king and country show no fear. We'll blind them with hot Earl Grey tea, sing Jerusalem till their ears bleed, load up the cannons with boiling gravy and gammon, lob sausage rolls till they flee for the channel, send in the chavs on their BMX bikes, then posh city bankers shooting spitballs from pipes as housewives manoeuvre great big Henry Hoovers, church bells ring out, cry Godspeed, hallelujah.
Yes, that's professional virtue signaller and poet Elander Moore, with a typically self-loathing ditty about hating Britain and a lecture about immigration. He's been pulling this cringeworthy grift since 2020, when that kind of woke tedium was still considered by some to be art. But now, really, after everything that's happened, and does the British Museum really believe that Britain meant to pillage and rape and steal, to enslave the natives, to make them kneel? Because if so, a fair few countries are going to want their pots and pans back, I suspect. They haven't lost the Elgin marbles quite yet, but it's clear British Museum bosses have clearly lost their own. Those chavs, gammons and housewives care about their country and every right to care about illegal migration, those orange boats and lorry vans. So what is going on? Well, let's ask Britain's longest ever serving arts minister and Tory peer, Lord Vaizey. Good evening, Lord Vaizey. Are you there?
Good evening, Harry Cole.
Why does the British Museum hate Britain?
Well, I don't think the British Museum does hate Britain, but let me just put in a few disclaimers before I get completely eviscerated by you. First of all, I'm not a trustee of the British Museum, so if you want the British Museum to defend its decision to ask that chap to give his poem on National Poetry Day, you better get a trustee of the British Museum or the head of the British Museum to do that.
George Osborne is my next, the chairman's my next in line for a guest.
George Osborne, of course, is a former Chancellor of the Exchequer of Britain, right-wing Conservative government that he presided over. And the British Museum is not entirely woke. It got into some controversy a few months ago by accepting sponsorship from BP, which a lot of people who work in museums don't necessarily agree with. I think they were right to do that. I think it's perfectly legitimate to accept sponsorship from a great British company. I guess what I might say in the defence of the British Museum, which is why you've asked me onto the show, is to say that the British Museum is a great classical institution, and it's been around since the mid-18th century. And it's a big, Greek-style Palladian building. It's quite intimidating. And people like you and me tend to be the people who go and see things in the British Museum. But the British Museum needs to reach out to different people, young people.
Lord Vaizey,
you and I don't know.
Lord Vaizey, how are they reaching out? How are they reaching out to people by calling them chavs on BMXs and housewives with their hoovers and rich bankers shooting pipes? I mean, I know the rich bankers probably keep the British Museum's coffers afloat, but this is a direct assault and attack on ordinary Britons, isn't it?
Well, it's an attack on one point of view in Britain, but I think the legitimate defence of this chap is that he is British and he has a point of view. He has a point of view about our colonial history, and some people agree with it and some people vehemently disagree with his point of view. But he's putting a different perspective to what you might expect coming from the British Museum. And I have to say that he's probably putting a perspective that some people in Britain sympathise with, agree with, and want to hear from. And they might take a different view of the British Museum now. They might say, it's not just one conversation in the British Museum. There are multiple conversations in the British Museum, and we could be part of that conversation.
But it's funny the way it's never the anti-immigration line that these cultural institutions take. It's never the popular, more sort of, aggressively patriotic stance that they take. It's always with a sneer and sort of looking down on the little people. And this just sort of goes, doesn't this not just solidify people's views of sneering elites who are attempting to counter populist opinion in this country that immigration's gone too far?
Well, most of the museums in Britain are extremely patriotic, and they contain collections that venerate and celebrate our culture. Tate Britain has paintings going back to the 15th century that were painted in Britain that celebrates British painting. The National Gallery has just taken a huge donation to increase its collection of 20th century British painting. The Natural History Museum, the Science Museum all celebrate British culture and British achievements. But history is a complex thing. People debate it. People debate our past. We don't blame ourselves, the people alive today, for what happened in the past, but we do want to debate it with some nuance and perspective.
Well, not much nuance in that video by the poet, is there? Did the British Museum pillage, rape and steal?
Well, I wouldn't use those words.
Well, the British Museum are using those words tonight, aren't they, with their video?
The poet that the British Museum chose on National Poetry Day did use that words, and it's very, very provocative, which is, of course, while we're debating. But as you know, there's a big debate that goes on about some objects in the collections of our national museums, how they were acquired, and you can have a civilised debate about it. You mentioned the Elgin marbles, the Parthenon sculptures. There are some people, like me, who think that the Parthenon sculptures should be reunited. They're one of the greatest artworks ever created. Half of them are in Athens, half of them are in Britain. They came to Britain in interesting circumstances, some say legally, some say under some form of pressure. They were originally bought by a Scottish earl to hang in his stately home, and they only ended up in the British Museum because he went bankrupt. Some people think a great work of art like that should be reunited in the home where it was created. And you can have a civilised debate like that. The British Museum has been very provocative with this poet, it has to be said.
Final question, Lord Vaizey. Is this a civilised debate, sneering at people? Do you think this is a civilised way of doing it? And is this, it's obvious the controversy this video is going to cause and the anger this is going to cause. I suspect by tomorrow we will be hearing from the British Museum. Is this a net win for the bosses of the British Museum?
We'll have to see. Sometimes when middle-aged men want to be hip and trendy, they can sometimes miss the target. So we'll see whether they can defend it. But as I say, there is a big, the British Museum has one big presence in the UK in terms of celebrating world civilization. But there are other perspectives, and the British Museum has perhaps been brave by allowing that perspective to be aired.
All right, Lord Vaizey, thank you for joining us. A noble effort, I'd say.
Thank you so much.
Lord Vaizey there. Adrian, why do the West continually have to sort of flagellate and apologise and dismiss the past and play these woke videos? It's not just in Britain; it's in America as well, isn't it? The Smithsonian's ripped up displays and inserted all sorts of caveats into their collections.
Absolutely. Listen, it's also art for art's sake, but when does it go too far? And it's just, it's infuriating. I mean, we see this in American culture a lot too. We see this with branding, with Crackle Barrel, like with a lot of the American brands, and they end up getting a lot of publicity out of it.
Sick of it though, right?
We're kind of over it. It is culture war. They're pushing it really far.
Martin, hip, trendy, metropolitan liberal elites get it wrong?
For me? I don't think so. Look, my first instinct in politics, having covered it for a long time, is usually to blame George Osborne. So I mean, I'm going to surprise you, and I'm going to surprise Ed Vaizey by I kind of broadly agree with him. I think there's a bit of a problem for the populist right as it's in Britain marching towards power. I think it's sometimes got to have a bit of a sense of humour about this. I mean, okay, that when I was growing up in the 70s, poetry was Pam Ayres and all that sort of stuff, and this is a departure from that. But I didn't think it was. Was the poem that terrible?
No, I don't think it was. Really? Not necessarily critiquing.
It was mild.
I wasn't necessarily critiquing the stanzas. I was critiquing the content. John, is this a helpful debate to be having, accusing rape and pillage and stealing and chavs and gammons and?
No, overall it's not. Look, I think you can always have the odd thing that's thrown in there to generate a bit of controversy, but the trend is, as you say, relentlessly doing down our own country.